Okay, I want you to imagine that I'm like 4 inches taller, and I have curlier hair, and I'm wearing really sharp glasses. Because Helen Sherman-Wentz, who wrote the following reflection, is home with COVID today. Yeah, it's a bummer. But she's on Zoom. We love you. We hope you get better really quick. And so this is her reflection. When I volunteered to share a reflection the day Marcia talked about reimagining grief, I thought I would probably talk about being present when each of my parents died at home. My father at 85, my mother at 99. Or perhaps I would share about the wrenching experience of when my 19-year-old nephew, Jeffrey, was killed in a car crash, and how devastating his death was for the entire family. But finally, I decided to share with you the grieving process I'm going through right now with a person who is still alive. In April, my beloved sister, Betha, got a fatal diagnosis. For 2 years, she'd experienced weak and wobbly legs and had a progressively difficult time forming words, all the while going through many neurological tests. Finally, she was diagnosed with multiple systems atrophy, cerebellum, or MSAC, a rare degenerative neurological disease that causes certain areas of the brain to atrophy. In my sister's case, coordination and falling, difficulty speaking clearly, and making decisions are her main symptoms currently. Eventually, her autonomic processes will be affected: blood pressure, breathing, heart rate, and so on. In July, she began using a cane. In August, when she began falling repeatedly, her physical therapist insisted she use a walker, and then in September, a more stable walker. Now she uses a wheelchair. Some people eventually become bedridden. It has been heartbreaking to watch Betha go from a vibrant 78-year-old who loved going on vigorous long walks, live in a wheelchair. She still sings in the choir in her UU church in Palo Alto while sitting in her wheelchair. She can no longer take an active part in helping when her church houses the dozen or so unhoused people for a month, but calls or emails church members to remind them to bring dinner the day before they signed up to do so. She continues to be in 2 book groups and reads voraciously, even more so than before, she says, so she doesn't have to think about what lies ahead of her. We grew up in a close family, a mother and father and 4 sisters, and have been close ever since. So of course we want to help Betha through her illness. My other 2 sisters and I talk with Betha frequently on the phone. At the beginning of the pandemic, we 4 sisters began Zooming once a week and have continued that ever since. Once a month, for a week, one of us stays with Betha in Palo Alto. A few months ago, she mentioned that she wished she had made it up to the Northwest like she usually has every summer to visit her sisters and their families in Olympia and Portland. So we've arranged that Martha, the sister in Maryland, and I will meet Betha at her home in Palo Alto, help her to get ready for the trip, and fly with her to SeaTac to spend a week at her sister Janie's house in Olympia. There, her Northwest nephew, nieces, great-nephews, great-nieces, and brothers-in-law will gather together. I expect it will be fun, joyful even, and bittersweet, having a good time together while hoping it's not the last time. How am I taking care of myself? By talking about my sadness, my grieving process, with my other 2 sisters, my husband, close friends, Reverend Marcia, my therapist, and by making time to meditate and walk most days. All of these help to clear my head, calm my emotions, and give me strength to carry on. Another thing I'm doing is grieving with Betha now. We talk about the things that we have enjoyed doing together over a lifetime, the joys and sorrows. I want to support Betha through her process of living, grieving, and finally dying. I want to grieve with her as she journeys toward her end here, towards her transition to death. I expect it will be very hard. I will miss her terribly. Yet I am grateful for our deep friendship, for the many times we supported each other through hard times, for the many conversations we've had about the books we were reading, about politics, about climate change, about our 2 UU churches, about music, for all the good times and laughter we shared, for the closeness we felt with each other and our other 2 sisters, for the shared love of our families and the joy we felt in being together. Ultimately, I am grateful for the love we shared all these years. Our reading today is called A Raft of Grief by Chelsea Rathburn. And it begins, the raft that means a great number is not related at all to the raft that carries people or their possessions in the water. The 2 words are homonyms, Morris Dictionary of Word and Phrase Origins. If only there were a boat, long and low and loaded with all we'd brought or built, the fatal inattentions, anxieties, and tics that time had sanctified, our good and bad intentions, rages, lapses, and aches. If only it were that easy to stand only ankle deep in the sullied water, hoisting our shared cargo, sinking no further beneath its weight. If only the boat did not need a rower, we'd push it off together, then wade to opposite banks, absolved at last, forever, buoyant, watching it go. Adam Silvera wrote a book called, fittingly, They Both Die at the End. In this fantasy novel, where most things are exactly the same as the real New York City, there is an organization called Deathcast that knows everyone who will die in the next 24 hours, and their job is to call everyone on the list and let them know sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. so folks can live their last day to the fullest. There's even an app called Last Friend, where folks can meet someone also dying or not to spend their last day with. In the novel, Mateo Torre is an 18-year-old boy with a dad in a coma and a best friend who is the mom of a 2-year-old, seeks out a last friend and matches with Rufus, a 17-year-old boy who watched his parents and sister die in a car crash and is very close with the kids in his foster home, a group that calls themselves the Plutos, because they're all way out there. Mateo, whose mom died giving birth to him, has always been shy, scared of dating, scared of putting himself out there. He's hoping to turn his life around in the next 24 hours and become someone who lived a life worth living. Rufus, having witnessed the death of his whole family, doesn't want to put any of his real friends through the guilt of watching someone else die. In their first conversation, where they agree to meet up and spend the day together, Rufus admits that after the death of his family, he felt suicidal. I would have been game with game over, but that's not what my parents and sis wanted for me. It's mad twisted, but surviving showed me it's better to be alive, wishing I was dead, than dying, wishing I could live forever. Deathcasts give folks the chance to say goodbye and give people the chance to really live one final day. Pop-ups exist that give folks the chance to, through virtual reality, swim with sharks, or skydive, or ski race. They get to travel to exotic places and see the world. No regrets, nothing missed. But what would you do if you knew you just had one day left? You don't know how you're going to die, so you can't avoid any particular thing. So what would you do? Do you want to cram in final experiences? Say goodbyes? Leave notes for people you love? Make a new friend? If it was just a little earlier in the service, I was going to give you a minute to talk with each other about this. Right now, I'm just going to have you think for a minute. What would you do if you knew this was your last day? My spiritual director, Melanie Widener, told me once that envy is actually a really useful emotion because it tells you what's really important to you. And so in that spirit, what I want to suggest is that what you said you'd want to do, how you'd spend your final day on earth, is what you value and what you might grieve. Did you spend time with loved ones, fulfill items on your bucket list, look for new human connections? What does that tell you about what is present or missing in your life right now? When we talk about grief, we tend to think of the death or loss of a person, maybe a pet. And while those are perhaps the most intense and distinctive losses in life, they certainly aren't the only ones. We can grieve the loss of a loved one through death, but also through divorce or breakup, or as we talked about last week, even dementia. We can grieve the loss of our identity when we retire or lose a job, when we move or have a baby, when we have health challenges, or when aging takes away things we used to do. All of these are losses, even when there's something good involved as well. Even if we are overjoyed at what comes next, it is possible to grieve what we've left behind on the way to the next thing. In October of 2001, my family consisted of my then-wife, Jill, and my daughter, Mika, who was 3.5, and Marcella was just born on September 11th. And we had a 16-year-old foster daughter named Jess. And I was in school studying elementary education. We had best friends. Life was good. And then our best friends decided that they were going to move back to near where their parents lived. We were in debt. Jill didn't like her job, and Mika hadn't seen her grandparents in a year, and travel was about to get way more complicated. And so we decided to move back to Portland, where we were from, where my family lived. It was a mutual decision. We sold our house, paid off the debt, found another home for Jess, and moved across the country. Jill, who had a doctorate in naturopathic medicine, was going to find a job. It was all going to be okay. Except Jill couldn't find a job, and I ended up working full-time. It was a reasonable thing. It was my turn. But it meant that I went from being a full-time mom of 3, studying something that I was really excited about for a career in a town where I had a lot of friends, to working full-time and pumping breast milk in the chiropractic room on my breaks. And that move led to many great things. We started going to the First Unitarian Church in Portland, and I found a career in ministry. I have lived in Portland all but 7 of the last 38 years, and I have deep, deep networks of wonderful friends and a job that I love. But to get to this place, I had to acknowledge the grief of what I'd lost. I have been profoundly lucky in many ways. Some of the most horrific forms of grief have passed me by, at least so far. But one doesn't make it this far in life without grief. There's a Buddhist parable about a woman who has lost a child and she is devastated. She asks the Buddha for something to make her feel better. And he tells her to go find a mustard seed from a house that hasn't lost anyone to death and make a tea from it, and she will feel better. Well, she goes door to door in her village and realizes that there is no house where no one has died. She returns to the Buddha, comforted in the knowledge that others know and share her pain. We have all lost pets and people and loves and jobs and grandparents. We've shared the pain of the death or illness of friends and family, and it is hard, friends. It is hard. And sometimes it is much harder than others. Sometimes grief is straightforward, and that's hard enough. My mom died a year ago. She was in 80. She was in poor health. She died quickly and painlessly. She knew she was loved, and we knew that she loved us. It was really good as deaths go. I wouldn't have wanted it any different, and I am sometimes still sad because my mom isn't in the world anymore. As someone who does a lot of memorial services, I can tell you that death is almost always sad. But only sometimes is it tragic. My mom's death, sad. My niece's death in July, Heidi's death, Selena's death, tragic. Death of a young person hits us harder. It's outside the social contract. It is outside of what we expect things to be. Deaths caused by violence or suicide are also exceptionally painful. Anything that leaves us wondering why, arguing with the God of our understanding or the universe about injustice. Grief also isn't a competition, and it's certainly not a competition that anyone can win. And complicated grief is hard. We've got such a binary attitude sometimes. Something is either good or bad. Someone was loved or hated, good or evil. But sometimes one grieves the relationship one wishes one had, or the fact that there is no more chance to heal what was broken. One doesn't only grieve because a loved one is gone. I am grateful for our Unitarian Universalist theology. Sometimes people with more conventional theologies take comfort in ideas about heaven and the afterlife. She's in a better place, they say, and sometimes that's comforting. A solid belief that your loved one is with Jesus can help make some sense out of death. But my experience as a hospital chaplain student showed me the flip side of that theology, which is that so many folks believe that prayer cures. And what happens to your belief in God when you pray because your child has cancer and your child dies anyway? How do you make sense of that? Life is 100% fatal. No one makes it out alive. I am not dissing prayer. I believe that focused attention is a powerful thing. I do it every Sunday, and I do it regularly in my own head. But in the words of C.S. Lewis, I don't pray because it changes God. I pray because it changes me. I don't believe in an omniscient God. My God doesn't decide who lives, who dies, and who wins the football game. She doesn't do weather. And yet I still pray. I pray because I know that there is something greater than myself out there. I pray because I am bigger than ants and smaller than galaxies and no more important than either except in my very tiny little corner of the world. I pray because I am comforted knowing that I am part of an integrated whole in the world and not alone. None of those beliefs are designed to reduce grief. And somehow they do. We are part of an endless cycle of life, writes Nana Krichovo, and there is something comforting in that. Sasha Evangelista, John Paul's wife, blogs on Substack under "In the End, It Was Enough." And she writes, "Grief can also be supremely clarifying. It scours us of all pretense, wrings from us otherworldly sight that can guide us when all other lights go out. The impossible thing grief asks us to do is to let go of what is gone. To do this work, we need the strength of ritual and community, but each of us, from a completely solitary place, must become a new creature in a new land, a self without, in a world without." Mary Oliver writes, "To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing that your whole life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go." And Sasha Evangelista writes, "The impossible thing that grief asks us to do is to let go of what is gone." These are indeed impossible things. Ordinary, impossible things done by every living creature throughout time. This week is Samhain and All Souls' Day, the time when the rays of light are long and the veil is thin between the worlds. Today, during our time of meditation, I invite you, if you are mourning a loss of any kind, to come up in silence and to drop a stone or several stones in our common bowl. Mourning is easier when we are not alone. And later, I invite you to share at coffee hour who you are mourning. Let's tell the stories of our loved ones today and this week, which is the best way to keep them alive. My friends, this week and always, may your grief be clarifying, reminding you what you value and who and what is most important to you. May your pain be eased in community, in knowing that you do not do all the work of grief alone. And may you be grateful for the love you've received that allows you to grieve what you have lost. Blessed be, and amen.